any anything you've ever wanted to ask about Hinduism. Because of your time constraints, we have to telescope the whole thing into a short period. I hope I can stay here till the end of the session and not leave before the end. Whatever the situation is, we are all yours. What I suggest is that let's experiment and be aware of how comfortable we are with this mode of teaching and interacting, and take our breaks according to how we move. Unless someone really feels that we need to stick to a very, very clear-cut schedule, I'd rather sort of let the process move along with it. So if anybody feels, no, we got to stick to the schedule, it's important for our peace of mind, tell me so now, then I'll respect that. Otherwise, given the fact that we're trying something new and he's doing a lot in a short time, I'd rather take the breaks according to the progression of his presentation. Yeah, we're cool with that? Anant, you're on. So I'm about to make you the presenter, and from that moment on, I'm fading to the background.
Okay, thank you very much, my dear friend Alon, and greetings to all of you wonderful students. It's a great honor for me to have this opportunity to be with you and to have a conversation with you about leadership in the Hindu tradition and more broadly about the tradition itself. So what I'm going to do, I assume that you read most of my piece, or perhaps even selected parts of it. I'm not sure how much of it Alon asked you to read, but hopefully you're familiar with some of it. I'm going to begin by, taking you through this piece, highlighting some of the important points which I think are there, and then open up this first part of it for conversation with you. Does that sound reasonable?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I'd like to hear your voices also. So if it sounds reasonable, we will proceed with this plan. Now, the first thing I want to say is that it's probably much more appropriate, while this is true of all religious traditions. I think I would like you to think of Hindu traditions rather than a uniform, homogeneous Hindu tradition. We've always been a tradition of great internal diversity and complexity, perhaps even more than most of the religious traditions of our world. And you can see this in the very name Hindu itself, which is doesn't describe a doctrine. It is not the name of a person. In fact, it's a word that has a geographical origin. If you've read some things about Hinduism, you would know that the word Hindu is the name of a river, an ancient river called by different names by different immigrant groups into India. This is the same river that we speak of today as the Indus River. Some call it the Sindhu River, and then it became the Hindu River. So the name was used originally to designate a community of people who lived in the area, in the territory drained by this river. And so it was not used to describe, shared religious practice or ritual or doctrine and belief. And so today I think it is helpful for you to think about this name as a name of a large extended family. Yes, this family has certain common features which makes the use of a common surname appropriate, but every member has also his or her own distinctive character, his or her own unique theological perspectives. And if we keep this in mind, I think we will not mislead each other. I think this diversity also, if any of you have traveled in India, I know Alon has traveled extensively in India, and he can comment to you about this later on. You would immediately see the great diversity of the Indian subcontinent. The linguistic diversity, every major state in India has its own distinctive language, and with those languages also go a very special culture. The subcontinent is diverse geographically and in terms of climate, and so all of this diversity, plays into and is reflected in this huge tradition that we speak of as Hinduism, or as I said, as let us think of Hindu traditions. Now, with that opening comment, what I want to say also is that this is not a tradition that is centered on a person. It is not a personal tradition in the sense of being centered on a historical founder or a single historical teacher. Of course, there have always been many distinguished teachers, and there are many distinguished teachers in the Hindu tradition, but it is not focused on the person in the same way that perhaps the other world religions do. As far as the Orthodox traditions are concerned, and in the Hindu tradition, generally we distinguish between what we speak of as the Orthodox tradition and the non-Orthodox traditions. In Sanskrit, Orthodox traditions are called Astika, and the non-Orthodox traditions are called the Nastika traditions. So in a traditional classification, there are 6 Orthodox schools of Hinduism and 2 or 3 non-Orthodox or heterodox traditions. Now, the distinguishing mark between an Orthodox tradition and a non-Orthodox tradition, and this will be very interesting for you, is that it's not a particular belief or practice. It is whether one recognizes or subscribes to or affirms the authority of the scripture. And by scripture, in this case, I'm speaking most particularly about the Vedas. So the Orthodox schools of the Hindu traditions are those schools which recognize the Veda as revelation and look to it as an authoritative source of teaching and as an authoritative source of wisdom. And the non-Orthodox or the heterodox systems, and two examples of these will be Buddhism and Jainism, and then we have ancient Indian schools of materialism. These are the schools that have explicitly rejected the authority of the Vedas as revelation. And so the Orthodox schools are fundamentally centered around teachings, not persons but teachings, and these teachings are understood to be embodied and contained in this revelation that we speak of as the Vedas. You would notice from my piece, and I would really be interested in hearing what you think about this and what sort of connections you see with your own tradition or with other traditions. But as I looked at the Hindu traditions, I think what stands out is the way in which the tradition has divided religious leadership fundamentally into a leadership of two types with distinct roles. And we may come up with different names for these, but clearly you see in my piece that I speak first of the leader as ritual specialist, and secondly, the religious leader as teacher of wisdom. Now, and they are seen as requiring different kinds of training, and they are the people who perform these roles have different kinds of qualification. First of all, a word about the ritual specialist. This is the person. And I know that you're having site visits. Is that correct, Alon? Later on, you're taking them to visit a Hindu temple?
Can you hear me?
You're going to visit a Hindu temple, are you not?
Yeah, let me... Oh, okay. Anand, on Sunday we're going to the Flushing temple. The Ganesh
temple. You're going to the Flushing temple. So my point is that when you go to the Flushing, and this is a temple, we can talk later on about it, devoted to God as Ganesha,
I just want to say one thing first, Anand. We're going to meet them as a religious community. It will be up to individual members to decide if they're going to go into the actual sanctuary or not, for reasons that you're familiar with about Jewish reluctance or prohibition to enter sites of other religions. And there's not going to be a clear policy. We've had a discussion in the group about it. The non-Jewish students, I don't think it will be an issue for. The Jewish students will do what they understand is appropriate for them. So therefore, we as a collectivity are not going there, but individual people may decide to do as they see fit.
Okay, I understand. That's certainly the right way to approach it all. I agree entirely. But what I'm going to say is that for those of you who go to a Hindu temple, if you did or this one, the person you will meet there is the person I'm speaking of as the ritual specialist. We also, the name that is given in Sanskrit for this person is a pujari. Now, the word pujari comes or is associated with the Sanskrit word puja, which means ritual worship. So one who performs ritual worship in a Hindu temple, this is one kind of leadership. The ritual specialist is called a pujari. And the training of this person is very unique and very special and a very lengthy process of mastering the intricacies of Hindu temple ritual, but I should add also Hindu domestic ritual. You should be aware that the Hindu tradition is also a very much of a domestic-centered tradition. A lot of the basic rituals required for the Hindu. These are daily rituals, these are monthly rituals, these are annual rituals, these are the rituals that mark life cycle moments. Most of these rituals are performed in the home. So the ritual specialist is the one who presides in the temple and also who presides in the domestic sphere. Generally speaking, every Hindu family will have or will be associated with or connected with a family priest who is a ritual specialist. In the temple, this is the person who is knowledgeable about the required ritual calendar of events, what is to be done in the morning, what is to be done at midday, what is to be done at sunset in terms of the ritual requirements for life in the temple. So if you think of this training in terms of the scriptures or the Vedas, which I just mentioned, this person is regarded as a specialist in the first. The Vedas are generally, let me say, divided into 4 sections. The first 3 sections of each of the 4 Vedas deal largely with matters of ritual performance. And so this person is very well trained in the first 3 sections of the Vedas and in all of the associated disciplines, like the discipline of astronomy and astrology, etc., which are necessary for correct ritual performance. The ritual specialist also has a great ability to recite the text. The emphasis is always upon correct, not only correct performance of ritual, but correct intonation of the associated text or the associated mantra. So which hymns, which sacred verses are to be recited at which ritual is performed. This is the sphere, this is the authority of the ritual specialist in the Hindu tradition. Now, the second kind of leader that I mentioned in my piece is the religious teacher, and this is the person that you would be more familiar with as the guru, religious leader as spiritual teacher, as instructor in wisdom. Now, the difference between the ritual specialist and the guru or the instructor or teacher of religious wisdom is that the religious teacher is expected to be someone who has a very deep and profound religious orientation, one who has a deep sense of religious search after God or the infinite. And this is a person also who has had a period of, which may extend to many years, of discipleship with a master or with a teacher who has led and guided this person through his or her personal religious quest. So religious commitment is also very important. The ritual specialist is seen much more in the light of a profession that one can be trained to perform. Of course, religious interest and commitment is good and valuable for this, but not in the same way for the teacher of wisdom. One cannot, imbibe wisdom to others. This is our assumption, unless one has also deeply assimilated and integrated that wisdom in oneself. So the Vedas, and particularly the last section of the Vedas, are what we speak of in Hindu tradition as the Upanishads. Maybe you have heard that word before, Upanishads. Or that section of the Vedas is also referred to as Vedanta, the last or the end of the Veda, or the culmination of the scripture. So the wisdom teacher, the guru, is one who has a great expertise in this section, the last section of the Vedas, which are in the form of deeply religious or spiritual dialogues. These are dialogues between spiritual seekers and their teachers. So this is the portion of the scripture which the religious teacher masters. But as important, or just as important as that, is that this person must have integrated and assimilated this teaching. So he or she must know the scripture, and as the scripture says, must be rooted in the divine, or rooted in the infinite, which is to point out a sort of existential requirement for this kind of leadership. So monasticism is not a requirement for either kind of leadership in the Hindu tradition. Either the ritual specialists, most of them are married. There are also teachers of wisdom who have families, although there are many teachers of wisdom who are also monks or who have joined monastic orders. But wisdom does not require the membership in a monastic organization. So I just wanted to draw your attention to that. So we can talk a little bit and see if there are any parallels in your own tradition or traditions with which you are familiar, which have talked about two leadership roles like this, the ritual specialist and the wisdom teacher. They bring clearly different kinds of expertise to this tradition based on personal histories and interests. The priest is not a seeker of liberation or moksha, as it's called in Sanskrit, does not guide others in this way. I think it's also a recognition that Hindus themselves, the human beings, seek different things from their traditions. So if you are seeking ritual expertise for particular goals and for particular ends, you go to the ritual specialist, you go to the pujari. If your quest is deeper and you are interested in the divine, in God, in liberation, in wisdom, then you go to the guru. And each one, as I've said, has its own kinds of demands in terms of training. Now, generally speaking, and this is a point that I'll return to in a moment, and you would have read this in the piece which I contributed to the volume that Alon edited. You would have read about the relationship between caste and leadership. Generally speaking, both the ritual specialists and most of the great gurus of the Hindu tradition have come from the upper caste, the Brahmin caste, for reasons which I will speak of in a moment. But at the same time, I do want to say that there have been and there are many distinguished teachers of wisdom in the Hindu tradition who don't come from the Brahmin caste. These are people whose spiritual caliber, if I would put it in that way, whose spiritual attainments are manifest and recognizable to others. And when such a person is present, I think he or she is able in significant ways to transcend the boundaries of caste. And I give some examples in my paper of that. These are very charismatic men and women who have who are deeply rooted spiritually and serve as teachers of wisdom in the Hindu world. So the religious teacher, the guru, in addition to being the teacher of wisdom, I think is seen in a larger sense as the custodian of the tradition. We have many good models of this. I think one of the important models would be the individuals we speak of as the Shankaracharyas in India. These are heads of very famous and ancient monastic institutions in India. They are teachers, but they have a wider role as preservers of the tradition, as repositories of the tradition. They feel a sense of responsibility for preserving and transmitting this tradition. I believe that there is a growing demand, and particularly I would say in the Hindu diaspora in the United States, in Canada, in Europe, in places that I travel often, for an integration of the ritual specialist, of the roles of the ritual specialist and the teacher of wisdom. I see that there, especially in the new generation, a new generation is looking to the temple priest for more than ritual. They want to learn more about the wisdom of the Hindu tradition, and wisdom teachers are much more difficult to find. They are fewer in number. So right now in the Hindu tradition, I would say, although I didn't discuss this very much in my paper, but I would say that there is a call, what seems to me to be an increasing demand for an integration of these two kinds of roles in the tradition. How this exactly is going to be fulfilled, we are yet to see. One of the things to keep in mind when we are speaking about leadership in the Hindu tradition is that we are speaking still about a tradition that is not centralized. We're speaking about a highly decentralized tradition that is not. There are some institutions, specific institutions, that provide more systematic training for leaders, but generally speaking, leaders are still trained and nurtured in individual disciplic type of relationships. But the integration of the ritual specialist with the wisdom teacher may require something much more from the Hindu tradition, and will require some innovation and adaptation on the part of this tradition. This is what I would like to say. But generally speaking, when we look to the qualities of the wisdom teacher as a leader, you would notice in my paper that there is not much discussion of what we might regard as professional training in administration and leadership. The qualifications mentioned there are still very deeply religious or spiritual, if you wish. The emphasis is upon, compassion, service of others, freedom from greed, contentment, and a rich corpus of spiritual values which are expected to manifest in such a person and to make for a good teacher and a good leader. Perhaps this is something that you might want to also consider. What role do such values play in leadership? Very often when we talk about leadership, we talk about values that appear to me to be more bureaucratic and administrative in nature. But what about contentment, freedom from greed, love, compassion? how significant are these in the formation of the leader, especially since these are not values that can be instructed about in the same way that one might instruct about skills in management or mediation and so on. I don't want to speak too long, but I just want to highlight what I see as a few of the, if I may use the word, systemic challenges, and I've hinted at what I see as perhaps the primary challenge, which is the caste system. Of course, I would like to preface what I am about to say by noting that this is a system that is under tremendous change at present in India. It's perhaps much more entrenched and visible in rural India than it is in urban India. But I think when it comes to religious leadership, it is still a system that has considerable presence and still pervasive. As far as background is concerned, this is a system that of classification that organizes human beings into 4 main groups, although that's very simple because each group has numerous subgroups that have evolved historically over a period of time. The 4 groups are the Brahmins. So if you think of it as a pyramid, or if you can imagine a triangle, at the very top are the Brahmins, traditionally priests and scholars. And then comes the Kshatriyas. These are the political leaders, military leaders. Thirdly, the Vaishyas. These are people of commerce, farmers, wealth producing. So Brahmins, those who teach; Kshatriyas, those who protect; Vaishyas, those who generate wealth. Fourth are the Shudras, or the workers, the manual workers. And then what led to considerable suffering and oppression in this system is that you also had a group outside of this fourfold structure. These were people who were outside of the fourfold caste system. They designate themselves or speak of themselves as the Dalits, the oppressed. Gandhi called them the children of God, or the Harijans. As far as religious leadership is concerned, the first 3 castes were the groups who were entitled to study the Vedas. So their religious knowledge and access to the scripture was privileged to the upper 3 castes. The 4th caste, the Shudras, and of course the untouchables, and women, I should add, were not traditionally given access to sacred texts and to the study of sacred texts. So religious knowledge was privileged. It had a sort of an elite quality to it. And so we still find in India, even though there is some discussion and some change in certain small areas, but generally speaking, ritual specialists are Brahmins since they have access to study, and this expertise flows in families because, as you may know, caste had a certain hereditary quality to it. You inherited the caste of your parents. So if your parent was a priest, you could become a priest, and so on and so forth. Of course, the drawback of the caste system as far as leadership is that it considerably reduces the pool of people who may lead. And when you have leadership that puts such a great emphasis on the hereditary factor, the factor of birth, you're also excluding from your leadership many people who are qualified in terms of having deep religious interests and a desire to serve, but who will not be given the opportunity for study of the scripture or for leadership training. So I think that's a challenge and a problem, and one that I hope that Hindu leaders will rise to and address. In other words, we need to move from a system that puts the emphasis on birth to one that puts the emphasis on genuine religious interest and aptitude. I would also mention something I'm sure you have encountered when looking at other traditions, the gender issue. Yes, we have many distinguished religious leaders who are women. But very often these are women who fall into that kind of charismatic group. They have sort of broken out. There are people who have distinguished themselves by deep spiritual vision and insight. They have not generally come through the orthodox system of training and preparation from which they are excluded. Again, there are signs of change in this regard, and hopefully we'll see more of that. I mentioned also the fact that the Hindu tradition is a highly decentralized tradition, so religious training often occurs individually, and it's still very, very traditional. We do not have institutions in India or in the West that are like your seminaries, your Jewish or Christian seminaries. I think Islam is also moving to develop seminaries which provide and integrate an academic study of religion, with the historical, critical methods of studying religion, with the more traditional and important ways of studying scriptures, with commentaries, and so on. So I think that this is an area where the Hindu tradition is facing an urgent challenge, particularly in the Western world, which is making a demand for a different kind of leadership, which also requires a different kind of training for the Hindu leader. So I think we will see in the future the establishment of Hindu seminaries very similar to what you already have, as I said, in the Jewish world, the Christian world, and to a certain limited extent in the world of Buddhism. And I think that training would necessarily have to be also a preparation for Hindu leaders to function more effectively in societies of diversity. Right now, Hindu leaders are not really trained and don't really engage in deep study of other religious traditions. I would like to say that I think that the religious leader of the future is someone who will also, in addition to developing great expertise in his or her own tradition, will also need to have a deep learning about other religious traditions, so that he or she can be an effective partner with people of other religious traditions in dialogue and also in the service of our communities. So I think I've spoken for about half hour or so, Alon. Perhaps touched on not important, but enough points to give your class some opportunity for some conversation. What do you think?
So, wait a minute, am I off? So I just want to first of all make certain that everything was understood. Did the audio come through? People were able to follow or not? Yeah, was it okay? Okay. So people understood. In that case, I think the best thing is to just give people a chance to interact and pose questions. Let's begin with that. I have some questions, but I believe I come last. So the floor is open.
Okay.
Yeah. For the sake of a relationship, and whenever you come up to the computer, introduce yourself to Anand, say a word who you are, so he has a sense of who he's talking to. That makes it more personal.
Yes, that would be nice.
Speak to Anand over the computer.
Yes, yes, indeed. Hi.
I'm a Catholic clergy. Can you say more about the concept of God in the tradition in the cultural and religious tradition of Hinduism?
The concept of God.
Yeah.
Okay. Sure. Just one moment. Just change my screen a little bit. This is, of course, a broader question, but I'm happy to address it for you, because it's one that comes up very often. What are the fundamental ways that Hindus think about the divine?
I wonder, should we first deal with leadership, focus on your lecture,
if you want to hold the question until this one, if you want to hold this question for the more general discussion, that's fine with me also, Alan.
I think so. Let's focus on issues of leadership and then move to broader concerns. Questions on leadership. Peter's question may take up most of the day, but at least I want to deal with it probably would take up.
Understand, yeah.
But let's deal with leadership first.
Hi, this is Khaggai Reznikov. I'm a rabbinical student in New York.
Yeah, hi.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Just speak up a little louder, it'd be even better.
Absolutely. I wanted to know if you see any tension or any tension in the interactions between priests and teachers. If that interaction involves any kind of conflict or confrontation, or if those two are entirely segregated from one another, so that there's really no, or maybe there's touching, it's cooperative. I'm not sure.
No, a very good question. I would say that generally the relationship is very congenial and cooperative. I will give you an example. Again, looking to, I mentioned the important organizations founded by Shankara, the Shankara monasteries. So in these monasteries, you have temples as part of the complex, where you have ritual specialists serving, and you also have teachers of wisdom. And the relationships are very, very good. There's a lot of mutual respect among them. They see themselves as fulfilling different roles in the traditions. Generally speaking, I should add that I think that the teacher of wisdom is occupies a greater position of respect and authority within the tradition, because of the value for personal spiritual growth and cultivation that is there. But to answer the question specifically, as I said, I think that I don't discern, conflicts or tension or antagonism between these two kinds of leaders. I think generally the relationship is harmonious and cooperative.
Good morning. Okay. Well, mine needs to be on. So. Hey, good morning.
Good morning.
This is Ayo. How are you?
I'm doing fine. How are you?
Fine, thank you. I'm hearing all kinds of echoes and.
I'm seeing you good, so let's try.
And then I can barely hear you. Should we turn up the mic?
All kinds of electronic noises.
How does this help me? Oh, gotcha. I'm in another world. Okay, patience, please. While we
Yes,
that.
of course.
Oh, okay, great. All right, so I practice Buddhism, and I have a question about approaching interfaith dialogue.
Yes.
If I want to invite Hindus in my community who are or consider themselves to be Orthodox, and I'm coming from what's considered to be a non-Orthodox school that
yes.
quote unquote rejects what's central to them, how might I cross that bridge? How might I be invitational to someone who's categorized himself in that way?
Okay, very good. Thank you for your question.
One second. I'm in a difficult spot. If we've just told Peter that he doesn't get answers until later, then we have to apply the same rule for Tayo. We want to concentrate right now on leadership discussion and then broaden to other aspects. You have a question?
Okay. That's not a leadership question?
Maybe I misunderstood it.
Okay.
Maybe I misunderstood your question. I understood that you wanted to know how to invite people to your community, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that
leader to leader?
Yeah.
How to engage in interfaith dialogue, leader to leader, when there's inherent conflict within our narrative?
Are we talking now about
I think so.
Oh, I see. Okay. All right.
I think so.
You
Okay.
want me to?
I'll withhold. Yeah, let's hold my
No,
question.
if you wish, I can
Okay.
wait on this. Wait to this one.
On leadership.
Okay, we'll wait.
Leadership. Peter.
We'll hold on this one. Okay.
Okay. Peter is back here.
He never left.
Hi.
In the opening paragraph, you did say that Hinduism as a community decentralized is not institutionalized. So, what role or how does leadership in Hinduism mobilize people? I mean, do the leaders there have any strong influence on? I mean, it is not institutionalized, yes, but let me say, in organizing the community, probably for a particular purpose.
Yes. Yes. No, your question is a very, very good question, and you understood me, first of all, correctly, that this is a tradition that is not institutionalized. So when I say it's not institutionalized, I would say that, you will not find the Hindu equivalent of an institution like the Vatican or, the Archbishop of Canterbury in England speaking for the Anglican Church, and so on. So there is no single figure speaking authoritatively for all Hindus. But Hindus, the authoritative figure for the Hindu, and most Hindus will, at some point in their lives, connect themselves with a teacher of wisdom, with a guru. So the authoritative figure becomes the guru, and the relationship of disciple to teacher or disciple to master is a very important relationship in the Hindu tradition. So those who look to a particular teacher as authoritative naturally would respond, with a sense of seriousness to his or her teachings and his or her guidance and instruction. I think that is where you would find if I would say, the institution of Hinduism is really the guru, the teacher-student relationship. Now, there are particular theological traditions in Hinduism, traditions distinguish themselves by their specific theology. So, for example, we have a non-dual tradition of non-duality that was systematized by Shankara. We have dualistic traditions that are associated with particular teachers and lineages of teachers. So people connect themselves with those streams of the Hindu, if I say so, Hindu tradition. They have temples and places of worship, and they have their gurus and their teachers. But what we don't have, is an authoritative institution speaking and as you said, making calls or mobilizing and organizing Hindus in this wider sense. Now, having said that, I should add that there are some efforts in this direction in more recent times. There's a recognition of the need for such voices or for such an organization. I can give you examples. There's an organization called the Vishwa Hindu Parishad, which is the World Hindu Organization. This is a sort of seeks to be a sort of an umbrella type organization, which wants to be representative of Hindu communities across the world and and in India. There is also a relatively new organization that has come into being. It's called the Hindu Dharma Acharya Sabha, which is the assembly of Hindu gurus, bringing
We've lost your sound. Really? Anand, I don't know if you can hear me, but we've lost your sound.
Show you what? I don't believe it caused it. Yeah. Okay, I've unplugged it. Oh, his phone line died. He's dialing again. He's a Hindu. He speaks with his hands, with his gestures.
Hello? 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 Hello?
Yes, hello, we can hear you now.
Yeah, I'm sorry. The first phone that I was using, I realized that the first phone I was using just now, I realized that the battery went dead on me. So I replaced it with one that was charging. So sorry about that.
Yeah. Just a second. We're going to take a second to reflect on what we can do to improve the quality of the learning experience, because we really need a centralized speaker. Matthew, what would it what?
What we might do is kind of like do what he showed up on the connector, and if you're a little bit more difficult, that's walk up to the but even if you were to make a question to him, like telephone or whatever, it might be just one guy on a big screen.
An 80-30?
Yeah, it's downstairs. Wow. You know, we can do it that like it's gonna take me 9 to set up, but might be a little tough to calm back and
No, we can go on talking. It's not comfortable. We can go on working. We just want to improve the conditions. Actually, I think just a good pair of speakers in the room will do it.
Last question, I believe.
give me about
Yes, steal from someone's computer. In fact, even in the library, the other day the librarian was listening to music. People don't need music. We need to hear our lectures. Kind of. Yeah, my worst fears came true. But unfortunately, I got wise to it too late in the day.
Alan, we will get this technology right. Don't worry. You know, it's all obviously, you know, we're experimenting also.
What? Yeah, sorry.
I thought we'll get it right eventually, Alan.
I can say I've got earphones and I didn't hear you. Say it again, Anand. What were you saying?
No, I said we can't be impatient. We're trying to do our best, but we're experimenting with technology also. So
Thank you
obviously,
for your
every time we
patience.
do, every time we do it, we'll get better.
Yeah, I'm learning. It's the first time I'm doing a class using WebEx rather than a conference, and suddenly the problem with the audio has emerged. I said I went up already this morning. She said she hunted all around. She couldn't find a spare pair of speakers, and she had the IT department has come in for later. And unfortunately, Allison, our contact person at YCT, doesn't work today. So I'm fearing maybe is there some of these Shiva you think we could get a? Well, Matthew's going to work on this. Matthew's going to work on this and see if we can just find a pair of speakers somewhere from. I mean, there's must be dozens of computers that are sitting on empty with a simple pair of speakers that we can connect as external and listen on one. Because as long as there's one central speaker, we'll be able to hear much better. That's really all that we need. I think that's preferable to going to a room that you're saying is without windows.
Yeah, if we're going to have something that
all right, so let's get back to the conversation and do our best. Where were we when your battery died?
I believe I was. I couldn't tell because I didn't realize it was dead until I saw someone making a signal that they could not hear me. But I can just repeat.
Oh, God! So you were talking about Shankara Ramanuja and Madhva. That's where you were.
Yeah. So let me just. Can everybody hear me now again?
Okay.
Everyone. Can everyone hear me now?
Yes, we hear you.
Okay. So basically, what I was saying in response to the very good question that was just asked is that the fundamental institution of Hinduism, if I would use the word institution, is the guru-student relationship, the teacher-student relationship. Now, what we have also had is the formation of certain kinds of organizations based around particular teachers. These have become, some of these have become very large organizations, like there is a Ramakrishna Mission. This is an organization that came into being around the teachings and of a guru by the name of Ramakrishna. So there are many particular organizations like that in the Hindu world. I was also saying that in more recent times, an effort has been made to have larger umbrella type of organizations representative of Hindus as a whole. An example of such an organization is called the Vishwa Hindu Parishad, which is the World Hindu Organization. This is an organization that seeks, not too successfully, but tries to speak for all Hindus to sort of develop a collective voice on matters of interest and concern to the Hindu community. But still, by and large, I would have to say that the Hindu tradition remains a decentralized religious tradition. That's what I wanted to say on that question.
Thank you very much.
Does that make sense to you?
Yeah.
Here's something very interesting in your discussion, which is the idea that over the course of time, people connect themselves with a teacher, or people come to teachers. Is that the basic model? That do the teachers go out and seek students, or do the people tend to gravitate to the teachers themselves? And if so, in what kind of setting do the teachers sort of locate themselves in order for people to come to them?
Okay, so very good question also. I would say, first of all, in response to you, that generally the issue here is that religious wisdom was always given or shared in response to a request for it. In other words, when a disciple approaches a teacher for wisdom, it was always, that was taken to be a very positive indication that this student is serious, this student has come to a point in his or her life where he or she feels a need for deep religious teaching. So this is why, the Hindu tradition has not been a sort of a proselytizing or missionary tradition in the same way as other traditions, because it didn't think that wisdom is something that could be shared in a proselytizing context. It is such a profound matter that it could only be shared in this very deeply personal relationship between teacher and student. The most effective wisdom shared is the wisdom that is embodied in the life of the person sharing it. So this is why, as you said, the teacher would begin to teach in response to a request for a student for wisdom. Now, having said that, I must add also that in more recent times, and perhaps the first example we've had in the West of a different kind of approach to teaching is an important figure in our tradition whose name is Swami Vivekananda. Vivekananda was a Hindu monk, and he came to the United States in 1893. You may be familiar with the Parliament of World Religions, which took place in Chicago in 1893. He came as a Hindu participant in this meeting. And so after the Parliament, he stayed in the United States, and he gave public lectures at various venues on the teachings of Hinduism. So in some ways now we see a different model where a teacher is publicly offering wisdom. Of course, the assumption is that those who come are still interested in it, but it's a kind of effort or a method which is an innovation in the Hindu tradition, and several teachers have sort of followed that model of publicly teaching in large groups, large audiences. So that's also been part now of a historical trend in the Hindu tradition. But I still think that at the heart of it is this conviction that religious wisdom is most meaningfully shared, when there is a readiness for it, or else it simply does not have the impact that it ought to. Is that what you? Would you like to say something more?
Yes, I actually want to perhaps further the question and ask, so when you talk about learning in a one-on-one situation between a master and a disciple, it sounds like a tremendously intimate and intensive situation. I wonder then how that wisdom manages to make its way to the laity, or if there is any idea of sort of the mass population ever receiving that wisdom, or is that something that's sort of reserved to a educated elite?
Well, I think that what we see in the Hindu world today is that we do have teachers who would, conduct public teaching sessions, maybe in a similar way that some Buddhist teachers are doing as well. But Hindu teachers do that. It may be general lectures or lectures centered on a particular sacred text. But for those who then develop a deeper and more serious interest in that kind of study or that kind of inquiry, they may join what we call the ashram of the teacher, or join the teacher's institution for deeper and what I would call, and what you identified as more personal guidance and instruction by a teacher. Hindu teachers will say that meaningful spiritual teaching is always a one-on-one basis, because it's the teacher has to also know his or her student in order to be an effective teacher.
So when you said earlier that at some time many families will associate themselves with a guru of some sort, Is that in the sense of joining an ashram, or is that in the sense of going to hear a public lecture? I guess I'm trying. I keep on asking sort of different questions, but I feel like they're centering around the same sort of theme, which is, what is the relationship between these gurus and the mass majority of Hindu worshippers or
okay, let me give you, okay, so I get you. I give you, I say a couple of things, and to give, perhaps I'll be better able to answer your question. So I was also speaking about families having a ritual specialist. That's one kind of, so Hindu families generally will also have a specialist, ritual specialist, who will perform all of the domestic kinds of rituals that are required. That's one. So let us say someone, a Hindu family, belongs to the theological or religious tradition of the famous teacher Shankara, right, who existed in the 8th century. So he established various centers for the dissemination of his interpretation of the Hindu tradition, which is a non-dual teaching. So families will be associated with that tradition, and so they will go to the if these monasteries may be in the area in which they live. This is the monastery that they will go to for teaching as a family or as a group, and this may happen down for generations. This is the particular lineage of teachers that they will look to for spiritual guidance and for instruction. And how much they seek and how intensely they seek it also will depend on their own particular interest and aptitude. And this would be the case for other families in other traditions. So there was a famous Hindu teacher in the 19th century. His name was Ramakrishna. And then so a monastic organization came up around his teachings. And people who are attracted to it, have an affinity with the Ramakrishna mission. And generations of families would go to Ramakrishna institutions, Ramakrishna monasteries, and there the monks of those monasteries will be their teachers. And they would seek them out and establish relationships with them. Go ahead if I didn't get still, your specific issue.
So I have further questions on that.
Can I just amplify? Oh. Just mute that. Go ahead. Let me share a little bit just from my encounter with Hindu families and how they relate to gurus. Yes. It's actually very similar to how Jewish families will relate to a tzaddik in a Hasidic group. There will be pilgrimages on given festivals to the seat of where the teacher is. If the teacher is traveling occasionally, you'll join them. If he's visiting town, he may come and stay at your home. If there are key life cycle events, marriage, birth, you'll make a trip to receive the blessing of this person. And while, shall we say, the core definition of this particular leader really is a teacher, but in fact the functionality of it is much broader in the exact same way that the Hasidic tzaddik is. And Anand, you agree with what I'm saying?
Yes, I agree with you entirely. The primary role, I would say, is spiritual teacher, but as you quite rightly said, this person becomes the person that families will turn to for advice in times of crisis. They will certainly want to seek the blessings of the teacher, and you've mentioned some occasions, on the occasions of marriage or beginning education, whatever occasion they think they need the guidance and blessings of the teacher, they will seek that. So the relationship, I think you're quite right, Alan, and I'm glad you made the Jewish connection. It's a very broad relationship as you described it, and that's quite right. That's correct.
So what I want to add is, I was going to introduce that category, but you did so, but I want to highlight it, is the notion of blessing. Because you spoke earlier about uniting the two functions of the guru and the pujari. And in a sense, the notion of blessing cuts across the two. Because blessing, okay, you could say that blessing is more material than wisdom, but blessing is not an immediate physical gain. And somehow, if you're thinking of relating the two, what happens is the holy man, the guru is not just source of wisdom, he's source of blessing. And the pujari is there ultimately to obtain blessing. And maybe the category of blessing allows us to create a kind of bridge between these two functions and to show how, and this is very interesting because it can open up an interreligious conversation on the role of leadership, not as educator but as transmitters of blessing. If we go back to the discussion we had the other day on the role of the rabbi, we spoke about what was primary in the rabbi was his capacity as teacher. But in fact, within his role as teacher, we saw how the role of the priest was amalgamated, and the priest. Now, he spoke about peacemaking, Senator, but in fact, it has in it the dimension of bringing forth blessing. There's no doubt that the sacerdotal function of the Christian priest, whether high or low understanding of it, involves some dimension of blessing, bringing forth the reality of the spiritual life in a form of blessing. And that's why I think that as I listen to you, it occurs to me that much of religious leadership is not just about governing a community and not just about providing teaching, but also in what way, one of two, you bring forth blessing, or maybe alternatively, you are a blessing. But I find the notion of blessing very rich and very suggestive for our discussions of leadership, and also a bridge between these two different functions within Hindu leadership.
Alan, I must say that's a wonderful connection that you made. I didn't think of it in that explicit way, but I think you're describing what does happen in the Hindu world with the teachers, because as many people go to teachers of wisdom, not seeking from them teaching, but they go for blessing. Even just to be in their presence, even just to see them is considered as a blessing, and people would seek that also for all kinds of occasions. So I think that's quite true. And certainly with the temple priest, people will also go with very specific prayer and very specific hopes and wishes, but generally they also go to the temple priest who performs ritual, and these rituals are sort of just to be connected with God, as a general blessing of well-being. This is often happens when the priest performs worship and brings the sacred flame and gives prasad, and all of these I think would fall more accurately into what you identified as the seeking of or the giving of blessing. I think very helpful comment. I like it.
There we are.
Here we lost sound.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Go ahead. Yes. Hi, Gela. How you say Gela? Gela Solomon. Yes.
With a hard
Gela.
Yes. I'm the two of problematic categories. So we had an interesting conversation yesterday about the concept of calling, vocation.
Yes.
I'm also fascinated. I'm fascinated by this distinction between the pujari and the guru.
Yes.
Because something that seems to there's an ongoing tension, at least in my experience in Jewish leadership, between this idea of a rabbi as like a career, as a job, versus as something that you feel spiritually pulled towards, and that may affect how as a rabbi one functions as a teacher. Like a lot of, I think, as Alon mentioned, it's the technical primary function of a rabbi, implicit in the title of rabbi, is as a teacher, and sort of in very technical senses sometimes.
Yes.
But so I guess I'm just curious about, and the other thing is that in Judaism we don't really have a language for the idea of a calling, of like a spiritual feeling a spiritual pull towards leadership or the rabbinate. And I guess I'm wondering if there's a similar tension there, and if there is a language of feeling called by God, either in the role of the pujari or the guru, or both.
Very good question, and actually I can see and hear you the best so far. So that's nice. I got you clearly, and I can see. First of all, I think I'll make the first point I'll make in response to your question is that one of the reasons why perhaps the ritual specialist, as important as the ritual specialist is to the tradition, because he or she is often paid a remuneration for his or her services, the spiritual dimension of the job is not seen as as meaningful. It's more. It has more of what you call the professional character about it. This person, you need certain services, and this person has the expertise to perform these services, at the end of which there is an exchange of some, there's remuneration. So it's seen as necessary, but because of that, it is. I would have to say that the pujari is less respected than the teacher, because the teacher, there is no remuneration for the teacher. A teacher doesn't get a salary in the same way that the temple priest receives. So right now, yes, we don't also have a word that approximates to calling or vocation, but the teacher is someone who comes from an experience of being drawn very deeply, either through some experience of some kind or some kind of personal quest to the spiritual life. And so because of that, he or she then, enters into a disciplic relationship with a teacher or a master. In some of the more organized traditions, let us say, I had mentioned before an organization like the Ramakrishna Mission, which has now become more institutionalized in its structure and so on. Those who come to join that institution, perhaps there are expectations that they would become teachers, they would serve as teachers. But I would say, in response to your question, that the service and the role of a teacher comes first of all out of this sense of wanting, if I put it in this way, wanting to know God, wanting to live deeply the spiritual life. And and therefore, sharing one's learning and one's wisdom becomes an outcome of that. But the primary quest is not I'm going to become a teacher of religion. I have this deep spiritual quest. I am pursuing it in a disciplic relationship, and perhaps I will serve as a teacher. I can share my wisdom with others. Is that? Yeah, okay. In other words, it will be treated as with some measure of suspicion. If someone says, "I want to become a guru," one doesn't really, become a guru in the same way that you train to become a doctor or you train to become a lawyer. And if you have this kind of desire to become a guru, in some ways it is seen as egocentric, as representing human greed for honor and respect, and therefore contrary to the deep spiritual quest that should be there. So maybe I can see and hear the other person as clearly as I did here.
The question now is, since Hinduism doesn't have, like you said, creedal statements, compared to
yes.
Judaism has some Rambam statement and okay, fine. And then in Christianity, we have doctrines, and then particularly in Catholicism, we have catechism. So what is the risk, or what is the assurance of consistency, in transmitting probably almost
I get you.
Message, by different gurus to their followers or students?
Very good question. Yeah, I got you. Do you say it? You say Rivka? Rivka? Is that your name? I see on the screen.
Peter.
Huh?
Yeah.
He thinks you're Rick. Tell him that you're Peter.
I'm Peter.
Peter. Okay. Now the
Peter,
name that came up while you're talking.
Okay, I'm sharing somebody's computer.
Okay. Sorry. So Peter, first of all, yes, we don't have a single uniform creedal statement, spelling out the basic orthodox beliefs that one must subscribe to in order to be Hindu. That's quite true. Now, but the different theological streams or the different theological traditions in the Hindu world, and I would say, for example, there's a theological tradition of non-dualism that is associated with Shankara. There's a theological interpretation of the scriptures that is associated with a famous theologian called Ramanuja. So these are all distinguished, I would call them theologians, distinguished theologians who have offered their interpretations of the Hindu tradition, and around their interpretations and teachings, certain kinds of theological traditions have developed. So they have very specific teachings and very specific ways of interpreting the tradition. So if you are connected with one of these traditions, you do have a particular way of thinking about the world, a particular way of thinking about God, a particular way of thinking about the God-world, the God-human relationship that is distinctive to your Hindu tradition. Think of it as, in some ways, not entirely similar, but think of it in some ways like different Christian denominations, with their own particular theological traditions. And here we have distinctive ways of interpreting the authoritative scripture, which would be the Vedas. So this is where the theological orthodoxy will be found. But even these traditions, Peter, they don't sort of systematize themselves necessarily in a very firm creedal statement. I would say that if I took a look at the Hindu tradition as a whole, I would say to you that not that Hindus are not interested in theology, but by and large, I would have to say that, practice, what we might call orthopraxy, has been more important to Hindus than orthodoxy. Right practice has been more important than right belief, if that makes sense to those who are hearing me. Yeah. Does that anything more, Peter? Okay, good.
Anand, I've been given permission to ask a question.
Yes.
I wanted to go just to a small point that you said earlier about you said in passing, and I find this interesting, especially since we have a significant number of female future past, present, and future religious leaders.
Yes.
And you said that it used to be primarily male, but now that is slightly changing or slowly changing.
Yes.
And
yes.
while you mention charismatic figures, and I'll mention one that I'm personally very close to. This is Anantanand, the hugging guru, who has given hugs to over 20 million people.
Ananatanand.
Statistic also.
Yeah.
Who is really a charismatic, who really grew out of any tradition and has become a global figure. But you're suggesting someone that there's been now a more systematic opening for female leadership, even in a small way. Could you tell us what it is you were referring to when you said that?
Okay, so I have seen now in some of the organizations that I observe, the more women entering into the monastic life and receiving monastic training in the same way that only males would have been privileged to receive. I'll give you two examples of organizations where this is currently happening. Again, you know, one is the organization known as the Chinmaya Mission, which is formed after, you know, the famous contemporary Hindu teacher Swami Chinmayananda. So he has established various institutions still in India for training of disciples, and now there are women in those institutions who are receiving that training. And the second I would say is also, and you're familiar with this institution as well, Alon, Swami Dayananda Saraswati and Arsha Vidya, his Arsha Vidya Gurukulam, which centers in India and also here in the United States. He has initiated women into the monastic order, and there are several women who are serving as teachers in various parts of the world coming out of that organization. You also have some familiarity with the Ramakrishna Mission. I don't think that they initiate women as monastics, do they? Do you know any of them? I lost your sound. I'm no longer hearing you, Alan.
Yeah, I believe there's a women's wing, not so significant, but if I recall correctly, when I was in Calcutta,
this
there
is
was
this is the Sarada, the Sharada Mat.
Huh? If I remember correctly, I'll double check that with whoever.
Of course, there is the Sharada. There is the Sharada Mat.
Sorry,
I think you're referring to the Alan. I think you are referring to the Sharada Mat. The Sharada
possibly.
Mat. Yes. I don't
but
know. But
also, if you're looking at the more classically established groups, Shivananda's Divine Life, Shivananda in the 40s and 50s.
Shivananda has also initiated some women. There are also women monastics there. But in the case of, I mentioned the Chinmaya Mission and Arsha Vidya because the women who have come out of that organization, I noticed that they are more active, very active also in teaching, public teaching roles of leadership. And so that's why I wanted to highlight them. Yeah.
I wanted to ask, you made an interesting statement with regard to the professional versus the non-professional clergy, and I guess it struck my curiosity. So if these gurus don't take a salary per se, how do they live exactly? Are the people bring them?
They live by. Okay, so we have a Sanskrit word, which is called, in Sanskrit the word is dakshina. And dakshina is, I suppose if you translate it as the closest English word, it would be a gift. A gift. So they receive gifts, but not an established or negotiated salary. Hindus who visit them would leave a small gift of some kind depending on your personal circumstances. And this is how they maintain their institutions. They support their disciples who live with them. This is the main source of revenue. But it's never considered to be, payment for teaching. And one is not obligated to give anything. Dakshina is something that is freely given. Do you have something of that kind? Is that concept familiar to you? What you might give to a religious teacher in lieu of a salary? Have we lost sound?
So let me come in on that. The Talmud says, it draws the analogy between Moses and God, and it says that the Talmud says, in the same way that I taught you for free, you teach for free. So the basic understanding is that wisdom is free, Torah should not be something to be paid for. And that's generated a great tension over the centuries about the possibility of paying for teaching and how that takes place. And what basically happens is that we give sort of substitute salaries. What we say is that we don't pay the rabbi or the teacher for his teaching. We pay it for how much he would have paid had he had another job that he couldn't take in order to do. So you circumvent that by paying de facto, but the euro paying a substitute kind of ersatz.
I see what
payment.
you mean.
But
that's interesting.
Going back to Gella's comment, as Jewish professional teaching and rabbinate has become more and more formalized, this has fallen by the wayside, and nowadays is rarely considered something one has to take into account. That is to say, this is observed in the breach. Rabbis will receive honoraria and salaries, and the prestige of rabbis is nowadays very often measured by the level of salary that they bring in, and the denominations are distinguished from one another because the Reform on the whole pay better than the Orthodox, and all this kind of stuff goes on, which is completely in breach of the basic core understanding of teaching. Like you could justify this, and this is probably the best way to do so, by pointing out that the role of the rabbi is no longer exclusively a teacher. He's a computer leader, he's an administrator, he's a social worker, he's a million and one things. So fine, he's got to be paid for taking the time. But as far as the core understanding, the core Talmudic understanding, you do not pay for receiving wisdom.
So this is very helpful, Alon, and this is something clearly that you share with us in the Hindu tradition. I mean, wisdom is too precious; it is invaluable. It is the knowledge about the nature of God. You should never try to put a sort of any kind of material value to it, and it should be. In fact, the scriptures say the teacher is under an obligation. If you are approached by a disciple who you think is worthy and serious, you have an obligation as a teacher to share wisdom without you should never fix a price for teaching. As you put it, it's freely received and freely given. I think it's something worth reflecting on. Yeah. Good point. Good point.
Good. Okay, do you hear me now, Anand?
Yeah, I'm hearing you.
Was that a yes?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. No, because they turned on the mic. Would you observe a phenomenon, and in your view, is this phenomenon very contemporary, where Hindu teachers are, in the same way that I've just described, Jewish teachers slipping away from this ethic of no pay, contemporary Hindu teachers increasingly commercializing their teaching, so that nowadays you have gurus who create mass movements that create financial empires. Some in the form, you can say, they receive lots of gifts. We spoke about this in class yesterday with some form of charismatic Jewish leaderships now ranking in the billionaire section, in the billionaire rank. But if I think of someone like Ravi Shankar, who charges for his teaching and charges for his courses, Mahesh Yogi, with whom he studied, initiated that kind of a tendency, and even even Amachi, who Anantanand, even though she will never charge for her teachings, in fact, there's strong commercialization going on through artifacts and other things. Would you consider this to be a modernist trend, an emerging trend, part of globalization, part of corruption of the tradition, or do you think this is something that's always been there in some way or another?
Well, that's a very a challenging point that you brought up, Alon. I certainly would have to say it has not always been there in the tradition. So it's a relatively new phenomena. And if you notice, it is not something that is happening with some of the organizations I know that you have been with and you have visited. For example, I don't see it in an organization like the Divine Life Society. I don't see it right now in the monks of the Chinmaya mission or the Ramakrishna mission or the Arsha Vidya mission. These are individual figures who have, started up their own kinds of movements in modern times. And I think, yes, I think that we have to be very careful and cautious about the commercialization and the marketing of spirituality that we see here. Certainly, there is a need for innovation. There's a need for some kind of adaptation because we're operating in a different environment where certain kinds of organization are necessary. But I think that I think your comment is a word of caution and identifies a phenomena that I would say is relatively new and in many cases also disturbing. So that's my.
We take one more question and then go for a break, and I believe Chagai has the last.
Okay.
What? No. Can you hear me, Anand?
Yes, I am. I am here.
Yes. So we're going to take one last question from Chagai and then go for a break.
Okay, sounds good.
If there's anyone else, can I jump in? Oh, okay. So, I see. That's right. I came in on the heels of you. Okay. In that case, Anand, let me just take a 1 moment. Procedurally, in terms of the quality of communication, are we at a level that can function reasonably comfortably, given the limitations that we're across geographic distance? This I think more or less fixed it, right? Is there anything else we need to do to be more comfortable with the situation? This is manageable, right? It's less ideal than having in the room, but we've now met the threshold of functionality.
Okay. So we really have to now learn from Ayo how to speak in turn and raise our hands and not interrupt one another. That's quite right. This is your day. So if it's Ayo's day, then we reconvene in 15 minutes, which is what the schedule calls for. And Ayo starts the conversation because her question was a bridge on leadership, and then we move to what I think is probably going to be the second part of our conversation, going back to Peter's question earlier. So a 15-minute break and a very hearty thank you to you, Anand. So now when we come back, we'll move into the more general discussion, right? When we come back, we move into the more general discussion. Okay, good. Okay. All right, we're back.